Is Pat on? Pat Dillon? I don't see Pat. Pat, are you on? Maybe I'm missing you here, my screen. All right, give us a minute, everybody. I don't see Pat. Will help us take roll call here, but once she's on, we'll get it started.
Chair Heredia, can you hear me?
There we go. Yes.
We're checking the sound in the boardroom. One moment, please.
Okay.
I can't hear anyone on the WebEx coming through. They're talking. I can hear them.
Can you hear us, Pat?
I can hear you through my computer, but I can't hear, we're not hearing you through our overhead microphones for some reason. We're checking. Just 1 second, please.
Okay.
Okay, Chair, can you hear me? Can you test your microphone, please?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Can everyone hear the chair?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
I can hear.
Okay, we are having a speaker problem in the boardroom, but we're addressing it and the members in the room can hear you. So I will start by taking the roll. Good morning, everyone. City of Avondale, Vice Mayor Veronica Malone. Councilmember Clay Goodman. Councilmember Clay Goodman, I see him on the WebEx. Mayor Kevin Hartke.
Present.
Vice Mayor Monica Dorsey.
Present.
Councilmember Mike Sharnow.
Present.
Mayor Bridget Peterson.
Here.
Councilmember Lauren Tomachoff is present in the boardroom. Councilmember Bill Stipp.
Present.
Supervisor Jack Sellers is present in the boardroom. Councilmember Francisco Heredia.
Here.
City of Peoria, Councilmember John Edwards is present in the boardroom. City of Phoenix, Councilmember Laura Pastor. Oh, present in the boardroom. She just came in. Councilmember Jeff Brown, Town of Queen Creek.
Present.
Councilmember Betty Janik, City of Scottsdale.
Present. Present.
Thank you. City of Surprise, Councilmember Chris Judd.
Here.
City of Tempe, Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage is present in the boardroom. City of Tolleson, Councilmember Adolfo Gomez is not attending the board meeting today. Town of Wickenburg, Mayor Rui Pereira,
Present.
and Town of Youngtown, Mayor Michael Lavault.
Yes, Pat, good morning.
Chair, we are ready.
All right, perfect. Well, welcome again. If I know we have a hybrid meeting here, some present at the boardroom and online. So folks on online, if you can make sure you mute your microphone or your phone or your computer on your if you're not talking there. And so I also wanted, before we start, I've done a bad job on welcoming new members. I know Mr. Councilmember Goodman started a couple meetings ago, so welcome. I know Mayor Ortega from Scottsdale appointed Councilmember Janik. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but welcome on our board.
Thanks.
And then also Councilmember Chris Judd from Surprise as new members. And if I miss anybody, I apologize. We'll do a better job welcoming new members moving forward. But getting with the agenda, first item, public comment. And Pat, do we have?
Yes, Chair, Blue Crowley is present with us today.
Perfect. Blue, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the time.
Hey, Pat, I don't think we can hear Mr. Crowley's.
We'll come over here and speak into this, please.
Good time.
Just
Yeah.
right there.
All right.
Just go ahead and sit down. And talk right here.
Okay. And where's the timer so I can make sure?
I'll watch it for you. Go ahead.
All right. The document I got on the second page of such, it says that the state allows RPTA to spend public transportation funds on capital maintenance and operation. However, Valley Metro Rail, that is very different. They only can use capital and utility relocation costs. So operations for light rail is 100% locally funded. So that's where the PTF funds go according to the plan. And then on the light rail, today on agenda item 4, it says sources of funding for light rail operations, right? And I look and I see MAG gives them money and the member city public transportation funds. How can that be in there for operating? Says the state says you can't do that. Well, I like those PTF funds to go to the bus and such. And I am always trying to get that part of the equation around and dealt with. But when I see that it says one thing in the document you gave me, and then it says today on agenda item 4, sources of funding, public transportation funds, 7.4 million. You're a maturated group because we wanted rail and the bus to be multimodal. Well, I look at the extension on the west part, and I go, well, where's the light rail stop at 7th Avenue? Where's the light rail stop at 43rd Avenue? Where's the light rail stop at 27th Avenue? All of these are bus routes. Is it the rail puts in its line to be as convenient for the rail rather than the passengers or the system? What we need to do is get the rail to understand that it is a multimodal thing. And I love that it says the currently adopted high capacity transit, the document pass is one that shows the Glendale, which you, before Mr. Weir said, hey, we're not going to have anything here. And the city of Phoenix said, we're not going to go 24th Street up into Parasite Valley. So, like I said, I wish I would have had the document so I could have gotten all of this for them, but I'll see you at the bus one and this.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. And any other comments, Pat?
No, sir.
Perfect.
Mr. Chair. Hold on one second, Chair.
Yes.
I don't think he can't.
Oh, he can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Could you hear me before?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I'll start over. I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session prior to the consent agenda in the event that the executive session runs long in the interest of the full board being able to participate. I'd like to make that motion.
Second that.
Thank you.
So point of order, Chair, the
Yes.
executive session is listed on the RPTA agenda and not this joint agenda. So I don't know,
It's usually listed for the board, the joint board.
the executive session is listed for the admin code, which is the RPTA administrative code, which is why that executive session is on the
That's not what it
RPTA.
was requested for, though. I have the letter here, why it was requested. I guess we need to speak to our attorney.
Mike?
Hey, Mike.
Scott?
Yes, Mr.
Oh,
Chair. Mr. Chair, members, it is agendized on the RPTA calendar as was just expressed by the board secretary. That is a publicly noticed document. And so any issues regarding legal counsel or anything of that nature should be discussed within the protections of the executive session.
I
The
understood that.
RPTA agenda, right? Mike?
Mr. Chair, it's conditioned on the way it is, on the way the subject matter is noticed to the public.
Okay, I guess the issue here is that it was not noticed for the reason it was requested. So I guess we'll have to address that when we get into executive session. Okay, I'll withdraw the motion.
All right. We'll get moving on this agenda then. Item number 2, Chief Executive Officer report. I'll pass it over to Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm hooked in through another computer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Mr. Chair, can you hear me all right?
yes, I think we can hear you.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. A few things to go over that have happened that we're excited about at Valley Metro. The first thing is that just this last weekend, I'm sorry if you were traveling down the I-17, but we had a very, very important event go on. You can see here in the picture, excuse me, our construction crews placed the supports crossing I-17 for our light rail extension, the Northwest 2 extension that extends to the Metro Center. You can see Metro Center there in the background.
Scott,
This is the first rail-only bridge over the freeway in our system. and
Hey, Scott.
we're happy with our crews. Thank you at ADOT for assisting us with this. This was a 250-foot main span with no pier columns in the freeway, which were designed to minimize the disruptions to freeway traffic. And the work was completed on schedule. And if you drive down there now, you'll see our bridge going over the freeway on I-17. Next slide, please.
Hey, Scott.
Just a couple weeks ago at that same site, we had the privilege of hosting U.S. Senator Kirsten Sinema, who joined Valley Metro staff for an up close look at the Northwest Extension Phase 2 Light Rail project. And we are so grateful for her office, who worked with us to ensure the receipt of the full funding grant agreement that we recently celebrated with Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg and FTA Administrator Fernandez here in Phoenix. We're thankful for the ongoing support of Senator Sinema, her staff, and also for her role in the bipartisan infrastructure law that was recently passed, which provides a great future for our region in funding projects on all modes of transportation. But of course, many of those projects will be dependent upon our extending Prop 400. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. In December, since last time we met, we hosted a large media group out to our Operation and Maintenance Center. Got some very, very good media coverage to celebrate the completion of the extension of that facility. Because of our expanded light rail system, we are almost doubling the size of our fleet, and that required us to add substantial workspace and track at our OMC. We have our first new Siemens light rail vehicles that just a week or so ago went into service. We also have 4 of the 6 Brookville streetcars for the Tempe streetcar system that are on site. And this new space was essential in being able to house and to maintain those. We're real thank you to Dan Filipino and Rob Rosenberg, 2 deputy directors in our operations division. You can see here in the middle of the picture who led the tour and did a good job of explaining what is happening to the media, which we got a lot of good coverage over. Another good event, next one, was we also hosted on December 15th in conjunction with COMTO, which is an organization dealing with minorities in transportation that we work closely with. The Reimagining Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Networking Forum at the Gateway Community College in Phoenix. We had a full house, COVID very planned and socially distanced, of 100 people representing agencies and businesses and small businesses. And we were, this was a special reach out to our DB and small business community. And we're hoping that there will be continued strong involvement in there and participation on their part. Kudos to Gary Flanoy, Henry Iquaduqua, and Patty Clark and their teams from our staff who handle both the DBE and capital development on our procurement, working closely with COMTO to make this happen. Also in December, we were able to celebrate once again the Mesa Santa Express. This is something we've done now for the last 5 years. We didn't do it last year. That has become a holiday tradition. Several thousand residents were able to enjoy an event where we didn't move trains, but they came in and out of one of our specially decorated holiday trains, and were able to enjoy our light rail system and celebrate the holidays. And we hope to continue doing this in future years. Also, we are celebrating the 17th annual Cool Transit Stuff 3rd grade art contest. I think you recognize that we have many of these community events on artwork at all different levels, elementary, middle school, and high school. This year we received 393 entries from 32 schools throughout the Valley. 17 3rd grade winners have their artwork printed in the 2022 Valley Metro Desk Calendar, which hopefully you've received. We mailed one to each board member. The Best of Show winner was Evan Benulad, whose art is on the cover of that. Evan attends Basis Phoenix Central, and we have 12 top winners whose art is featured on the month, and 4 honorable mention winners who are all. 17 additional 3rd graders were recognized as special recognition winners, so we spread the wealth around, but there was a lot of good work done by our youth, and they also connect with transportation. As requested by the board, you have also the last 2 months of ridership report. Want to highlight a couple things, and that is that from 2020 to 2021, which are both pandemic years, you can see we've had a substantial increase in ridership month over month, both in year over year, both in December and in November on bus and light rail, especially light rail. The recovery in December year over year was almost 60%. And so we're seeing people come back to transit, but it is not a rapid recovery. They are trickling back. We are still down from pre-pandemic areas about 46, 47%. So we're working on adapting to a new reality and monitoring the change in the workplace, and of course with the Omicron variants creating more disruptions. We are still operating at a fairly high level of ridership, although it is down significantly, and we look forward to that going forward. Speaking of operations, I just want to make you aware that we, for the most part, as an entity, have been somewhat immune to the impacts of COVID and the pandemic. From an operations standpoint, we've been very, very grateful for that. Although our staff and operations on both the bus and the rail side and paratransit have all been operating. They've been heroes, yeomen. In the last 2 or 3 months, you need to be aware that we have had impact from this. And to just give you an example, on the bus side, Valley Metro operates 70,000 trips each month, 70,000 bus trips. Normally, our operations does an amazing job, and we average between 25 and 30 missed trips per month. That's 25 to 30 out of 70,000. We are incredibly dependable in being there when we say we're going to be there. That changed in November and December. November, the missed trips are due solely to lack of staff available, lack of operators to operate buses. We increased from about 30 missed trips to 425 in November, and that ballooned to over 725 in December. Now that's still, if you think 700 of 70,000 is a very small percentage, but in Valley Metro in our system, most of our routes operate on 30 or 60-minute headways. So if we miss even a single route, it has an impact on people. I just want to make you aware we are working, but we are experiencing, like other systems around the country and like your cities, positions are very difficult to fill. And we have had outbreaks of the Omicron COVID that have hampered our operations, and we will keep you and your staff up to date if it gets any worse than what it is right now. We have so far been able to dodge the bigger bullet that many other systems. We have some systems around the country who have had to cut their schedules by 20 to 25% due to staffing shortages and pandemic, and we are nowhere near that. But I just want to make you aware that we are seeing the impacts of both of the ability to recruit and maintain staff and outages due to COVID. Our calendar, as you can see, the TMC RMC Audit and Finance, and the next regularly scheduled board meeting is February 17th. I know there will be discussion on some other things that may take place outside of that. One thing to make sure you're aware of that is in that meeting, we will have a presentation in the study session format of our 2023 operations and capital budget for the entire board to go over. And Mr. Chair, that is my report.
All right, thank you, Scott. Can you hear us, Pat? Can you hear me? No?
Mr. Chair, this is Bill. I can hear you.
Okay.
Councilmember, we're having another issue hearing you. One moment, please.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can you hear us now, Pat?
Yes, sorry.
All right, perfect. All right. Next item, Audit and Finance Subcommittee meeting update. I'll call on Councilmember Stipp to provide this update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be extremely brief. We had a very short meeting. We reviewed the contract management rail transportation services audit that was approved by the Audit and Finance Subcommittee. We had an update on the transit life cycle program from the budget staff that is going to then now start through the RTAG process. So everyone's staff should start to see that and have that discussion. Part of that was the rebalancing. We had a discussion last year about the need to look at sub-regional equity. That with the increase in revenues seems to have stabilized. So your staff should be having a great discussion on that, and it should come back to the full board. The minutes are attached to the agenda for today. It was a fairly short meeting, but it was very in-depth. I think the minutes provide the rest of the information if you care to see the detail. And with that, that ends my update, and I'm subject to questions.
Any questions? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Thank you, Councilmember Stipp. Next item, the consent agenda. Consent agenda is presented for action. If folks have any questions or comments on the consent agenda, I'll take them now. If not, I request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
Mayor Harkey, I'd make a motion to approve.
Second.
All right. I think, Pat, you'll decide who said second first. So all in favor say aye.
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 Any nays? Ayes have it. We'll move forward. Item number 5, we have Momentum 2050. I'll pass it over again to Mr. Scott Smith to provide the intro. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and everybody else. I will introduce Audra Kester-Thomas from MAG, who will give the board a report on both the Momentum 2050, which basically is the Prop 400 extension, and also the legislative initiatives that are underway right now related to that, and how that impacts transit specifically. So, Audra, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, Chairman Heredia, members of the Valley Metro boards. On behalf of your member agencies who also sit at the Maricopa Association of Governments and the others that complete the 32 cities, towns, counties, and Native nations that make up the Maricopa Association of Governments, thank you so much for inviting us to be here to give a presentation on the latest developments of Momentum, our long-range transportation plan to inform an extension of Prop 400, the dedicated half-cent sales tax first established by Maricopa County voters back in 1985. This is a short and brief presentation, so much more of this story to tell, certainly over the development of the last 3 years. As always, we stand ready, working with your staffs offline to answer any additional questions or do deeper dives if you are so interested. At the time today, perhaps we won't be able to address. With that, next slide. I'm going to provide just a brief overview of the investment that we have committed to over the course of the last 35 years and into the next generation, and the work really that's culminated in over 2 years worth of a public process. Talk a little bit about some of the technical aspects for which guide how we develop a long-range plan, both guided by federal statute and state statute, before talking about next steps associated with our success. Next slide. Just for a point of reference, Maricopa Association of Governments planning area encompasses all of Maricopa County. Back in 2010, after our urbanized area started to grow out into the Southeast Valley and northern Pinell County, because our urbanized areas need to be contiguous, which drives a large portion of the federal formula funding that comes to the region. Our planning area needed to be expanded, and the governor did so, opening up our planning area to the northern Pinell County portions, including all of the city of Maricopa, the entirety of the Gila River Indian community, down to the town of Florence and up through Apache Junction. We're 10,000 square miles of coverage, larger than the state of Maryland in terms of a planning area. And as all you know, that's a considerably diverse a portfolio of transportation needs, different development patterns. It makes our jobs both exciting and challenging. Next slide. The half-cent sales tax, first passed by voters back in 1985, has been instrumental to developing the Phoenix metropolitan region as the economic engine for the state of Arizona. You'll see here the major corridors established, funded, improved through the dedicated half-cent sales tax, first with Proposition 300, a freeway-focused entity, and then into Proposition 400, passed by voters in 2004. It became multimodal in part because of a previous vote, which was intended to establish a second half cents dedicated to transit. That failed at the ballot, and one of the many reasons Proposition 400 became a multimodal tax, including contributing to the establishment of light rail, soon streetcar, contributing some regional funding to bus operations to ensure contiguous service crossing borders, as well as arterial and other programmatic investments spanning active transportation to safety. You'll see here just some of those investments highlighted, but certainly not all of them, and something we're certainly proud of, the 35-year history delivering transportation throughout the region. Next slide. You know the impacts of these investments. The freeway system alone saves the average motorist approximately 105 hours a year in commute time. Over 80% of our jobs are located within a mile or two of a freeway corridor or light rail corridor. And you all very much know the valuation impact, certainly documented in your quality of life report, issued by Valley Metro as part of the 10th anniversary celebration of light rail in this region. The compounding benefits of transportation investments really do unlock potential and prosperity for all of us. Next slide. So what does our future look like? We are required to take a long view when we do these development plans. Next slide. And what you'll see here, using the sophisticated transportation demand model that we've invested in at MAG over the course of the last several years, you look out to the year 2050, if we don't continue transportation investments like we have, we stop investing in transportation and the expansion of a system. What you see here depicted in 2005 is almost every one of our facilities stuck in gridlock and afternoon congestion. That's clearly what we don't want to occur. We are rapidly growing. We will continue to see congestion grow as more people discover the quality of life that we all here enjoy. We want to mitigate as best we can. That's our challenge. That's our job at MAG, to mitigate those impacts as best we can. Next slide. I was asked by Chairman Heredia specifically to touch a little bit on the public involvement that was included in the development of the plan. I was happy to hear some interest in focusing on this a little bit as part of today's presentation. We have over now 3 years worth of commitment to public engagement and research that really guided the development of the plan that we'll present here today. Next slide. We first started this effort doing values mapping, research, going out and asking what residents here in this region value most. We wanted certainly to protect those values and use them to guide the development and investment choices that we had. Some of those takeaways include constituents very much valuing that there is, in fact, a vision for transportation. We did some focus groups. A lot of folks referenced the founding fathers of this region and how wise they were in proactive transportation investments. People don't necessarily know who's responsible for that work, but they certainly value that there is a long-range vision and champion that. Folks really care a lot about choice, mobility, and connectivity. They like how the region was built. They like that they can choose your individual communities based on their preferences or the amenities you offer, and that there's a transportation system that connects them to the other places they want to go, whether that's jobs or education. They want and agree that we need to be flexible into the future. I joke that the engineers and transportation planners that came before us had a much easier job than we have today. A few tools in the toolbox. Today, we don't even know what some of those future tools are. And so we want to make sure that government is nimble into the future and can pivot as necessary to emerging technologies. And then finally, discrete and substantial support for continued and expanded transportation investment in this region, uniquely a higher rate of support than is seen in other parts of the country. Next slide. So in 2020, we are starting the plan development process, looking at goals and objectives, asking member agencies to provide us their ideas, project needs. We also asked the public what they saw for their future and what they wanted to prioritize. What you see here is some of the summary feedback that we received. Certainly continued expansion of transportation options throughout the region. People like choice. You'll see a recognition here of constituents that we will continue to grow. So this is unique. Folks recognize that people are going to continue to come. There isn't necessarily the mentality of shutting the door behind the last person in. We just want to be able to stay ahead of growth and be able to be responsive to it. You'll see here there's a high level of import placed on protecting and maintaining the system investments we've already made. Constituents absolutely want to ensure good maintenance and high quality transportation investments long run. You also see here a high value placed on safety. Constituents continue to tell us they want a safe system above all else. This helped to guide some of the investment choices that we made. And then finally, a discrete interest in ensuring that transportation decisions aren't isolated and that they can work in concert with other goals, including both public health outcomes as well as environmental sustainability. Next slide. Our mayors also asked us to go out and do some polling, recognizing that we can build a good plan, we can pass a good plan, but ultimately this is supported by a dedicated half-cent sales tax that voters have to also approve. And so we were directed last year to go out and do polling of highly likely voters in Maricopa County to ensure that we were still on track and responsive to those needs. We went out early in the year, January and February. The margin of error is just over 3%, having interviewed over 1,000 individuals using landline, cell phone, and online panel. Next slide. I'll share just a few slides from our research. In short, it continues to consistently replicate what we've been hearing in all of our other public engagement. We do have all of these findings documented if you're interested in digging deeper, but I did want to share just a few slides for your benefit. You'll see here when asked what is the one most important transportation investment that we can make, you'll see reported here those specific mentions. And what you see here is the takeaway is that folks want a multimodal system. You'll see light rail and transit, highway and freeway, streets and roads, all competing for the top spots. And this, again, replicates the feedback we continue to see, that folks recognize that we need a multimodal portfolio. We need to continue to expand the system in all of those varying ways. Next slide. You'll see here, this slide, what we ended up doing is then going back and asking for people's level of importance on investments on 8 discrete types of transportation investments. So these were different kinds of categories that we were anticipating potential investment in and wanting to make sure they reflected also the values of our constituency. And what you see here on a 5-point rating scale, where 5 is a very high priority and 4 is a high priority, all 8 of these items, at least 50% of those who are responding to our survey indicated a high or very high level of support for. The top being future transportation technologies, emerging technologies, being ready for a future that's uncertain. But you continue to see major street and intersection investments being really important, increasing the number of lanes on our freeway and highway system, expanding the bus system to new areas of the valley, light rail, expanded rapid transit system like BRT, making bus service more frequent, as well as building more sidewalks and active transportation. Next slide. We also asked about constituents' recognition and their level of value in regionally vested investments. So the focus of Proposition 300 and 400 has been on those big projects that one community can't carry on their own, that we come together to invest in as a region, and wanted to make sure that residents, constituents here in this region still value that regional focus. And what you see here is an overwhelming amount of support for a continuation of regionally focused investments, voters understand that even if a specific project isn't in their backyard, it benefits the whole system and that we're in this together. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit now about building of the plan itself. Next slide. You'll see here the 6 different goals that guide the development of the plan. Nothing necessarily shocking or surprising, unique here. Bread and butter, of course, to the values of transportation in your work on every day. But I do want to point out the responsiveness goal in that upper right-hand corner. I mean, top of mind for our mayors in particular is that need that we're challenged with having to plan out and make decisions out to the year 2050. But not necessarily knowing all the technology or the specific solutions today. And so I think our mayors gave us the charge that we want to make sure that we identify major corridors that need investment in, but also the recognition that we could need to pivot and change in the future. Next slide. This is the performance-based evaluation process. I won't spend a lot of time here other than to emphasize the amount of data research analysis that went into this work. We are guided, as I mentioned, by federal law in using data and making our performance-based decisions. This was critically important because of the tremendous amount of transportation need, demonstrated transportation need in this region, and the need to be a fiscally constrained portfolio. Next slide. You'll see that illustrated in this map that shows the discrete projects your cities and staff turned in for consideration. These are the ones we can map. There are many more that weren't necessarily in a geographic location, perhaps represented by a potential program or idea that a member agency or several offered. What I do want to point out is in the bottom left-hand corner is the dollar amount. There is, and this demonstrates a portfolio of over $90 billion worth of demonstrated transportation need in our region, far exceeding available resources. It made our jobs much more difficult and made mayors' jobs very difficult in making some tough trade-off decisions, and really made us rely on that performance-based evaluation process using data to find our highest of high priorities. Next slide. We used our evaluation process to get down to a smaller number of viable projects for consideration, and then we demonstrated the differences and options that really our elected officials have. There isn't just one solution or investment choice, and so what we ended up doing is building 2 different scenarios, using it guided by 2 different philosophies, and given the amount of interest in transportation demonstrated by our member agencies, we illustrated these scenarios not only at a continuation of a half-cent sales tax in Maricopa County, but we felt obligated to also demonstrate what would happen if we could increase our sales tax rate to 1 cent, the same authority every other county in the state of Arizona already has, except for Maricopa County. Felt obligated to be able to demonstrate that, particularly because the pinch in transit is so difficult. And so we delivered those options for consideration and worked through the spring, ultimately to get down to a process where we have a fiscally constrained portfolio. Next slide. You'll see those options articulated here. We went out and got public feedback on those 4 alternatives as well, and ultimately guided by the Transportation Policy Committee, defined by state statute, a public and private partnership joining our mayors and elected officials with members, the business community, ultimately in June unanimously recommended and regional council unanimously approved a portfolio of projects supported by continuation of the half-cent sales tax for a term of 25 years. In total, when compared or combined, I should say, with the federal formula funds that come to the region and our state shared revenues, you'll see a portfolio of just about $36 billion. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit more about what's included in the investment plan. Next slide. Again, you'll see here the different funding sources. We focus a lot and talk a lot about the dedicated half-cent sales tax here in Maricopa County. If there's something I want you to take away from today is recognition that makes up about half of our portfolio. It's matched with important federal funding that comes by way of formula, and as noted, our share of the State Highway User Revenue Fund, and again, totaling approximately $36.7 billion. Next slide. You'll see here a map of the discrete capital projects included in the funded plan. I won't spend a lot of time on this map. There's several hundred projects depicted here, but I do want to focus on a few, knowing my audience, and focus in transit in specific. You'll see 2 extensions of Light Rail West supported with this plan on I-10 West, as well as a West Phoenix option, the locally preferred alternative to be determined. Both of these projects support in concert with T2050 and City of Phoenix's dedicated investment in the light rail expansion, matching those local funds. With the anticipation this region will continue to be extremely competitive and successful in acquiring discretionary funding from the FTA, that 40 or 50% that we have routinely been able to deliver, bringing new funds, federal funds coming into this region and state. We're really excited about the potential of bus rapid transit in this region. We have identified regional support to complement local funding for 3 bus rapid transit projects. One on 35th Avenue, as you'll see, another on Scottsdale Rural Road, and then another into the East Valley along Arizona Avenue and into Mesa. In addition to all these discrete projects, you'll see several expansions of our freeway network, finishing out the HOV network and adding important DHOV lanes, which really help maximize our bus transit or commuter bus options as well. In addition to these discrete capital projects, we have several programs that I want to spend some time focusing on. Next slide. You'll see here some fast facts and lane miles to give you kind of a quantitative view what this investment portfolio contains. But as mentioned in the salmon color on the bottom, you'll see some discrete programs. This is one of the ways that we're being nimble into our future and flexible, setting aside funding that over the course of every couple of years, member agencies, cities, towns, counties can chase, finding the best projects in the region and awarding funding through our very well-established call for projects process over at the Maricopa Association of Governments. These programs in particular, some of them are an expansion and continuation of successful Proposition 400 era programs, but we have some new ones as well, hearing the feedback not from the public, but also from our mayors as well. And I want to make sure we spend a little time focused on those investments. Next slide. You'll see active transportation listed here first, over $1 billion set aside for bicycle pedestrian investments. We hear so much support from the public for a continuation and expansion of non-motorized network throughout our region. And as such, we have responded with $1 billion set aside for active transportation investments. Continuation of our air quality programming, as you are familiar with, some of that support comes to the Van Pool program and Share the Ride. That's part of our federal air quality conformity process. We have several mitigation factors in order to stay on target and continue those federal formula funds coming into the region. Continuation of this air quality program. Continuation and expansion of our arterial investments. Bus transit, as noted, you all know we have a regionally branded but largely locally funded transit network in this region. As part of Proposition 400, there is some funding that goes to the supergrid to help make for contiguous investments across jurisdictional boundaries. We're able to nearly double the amount of funding to support bus investments throughout the region as part of this investment package. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the details here in a few minutes. Emerging technologies, setting aside funding for those solutions, technologies, smart region investments that we want to make, but perhaps don't know the details yet today. Continuation of our ITS investments, those technologies that make us move safer and more efficiently throughout the region. Expansion of our safety program, again, and specifically in response to public feedback. And then an expansion of a true regional transportation demand management. Again, this is ways to operationalize the system investments you've already made, figuring out activities, strategies to reduce the number of single occupant vehicles on our roadways. Next slide. I wanted to focus just a little bit on some of the specific elements associated with transit policy. All funding decisions will be centralized at the Maricopa Association of Governments. That's in part due to the number of different federal funding, state funding, and in addition to that, of course, the sales tax funding that comes into the region. We're being a little bit more nimble about, and maybe more deliberate is what the word I should use, about the funding choices. We committed some research in analyzing the cost of federalizing projects as part of Proposition 400. We actually made the decision to put federal funding on some of our smaller projects. We've learned that that adds considerable time and cost to projects. And because we want to be a little bit more nimble and deliberate about when we use federal funding versus how we use sales tax funding, we need those decisions centralized and then continue our partnership with our partners, ADOT and Valley Metro, in implementing ultimately those projects. You'll see here some notable changes to the transit program. We have dedicated funding set aside for park and rides and transit centers. You'll see bus operating assistance will be guided in two formats. One, a continuation of a base allocation, which represents the 2019 TLCP regional bus operating assistance. One of the things that we heard strongly from our mayors and specifically from our city managers was the desire to keep constant or hold constant the amount of funding coming out of Proposition 400 into the next generation. And so we're doing that by establishing this base allocation. Jurisdictions will see that fixed over the life of the extension. But you'll note we've added funding, a little more funding to bus transit, and we'll be allocating that based on the second element of the bus operating guidance, which is by formula, using a 50% boardings, 50% revenue miles, every 2 years allocating out bus operating assistance based on performance. In other words, cities, as you're making your local decisions on transit, where you're going to extend or improve bus routes, as you continue to make those decisions, those that have the highest performance will likely be able to receive more funding. And recognizing that we only have a limited regional pot to assert towards bus transit, we wanted to make it performance-based. You'll also see here some set aside for seed funding. We heard loud and clear, and we certainly know transit demand will continue to grow throughout this region. We want to partner with local jurisdictions by setting aside some seed funding where the region takes on a higher amount of risk to test out and see if there's transit viability in new emerging markets. And over the course of 4 years, the region taking a smaller and smaller share, and that local jurisdiction or local jurisdictions picking up a larger share. The end of a 4-year term, the cities or jurisdictions can determine whether they want to continue to fund that transit service and make it eligible for potential funding in that formula, or if the viability of transit demand just isn't there, make the decision to discontinue service in that seed-funded route. You'll also see here set aside for commuter bus or express bus, that unique, very regionally focused service that pulls individuals from where they live to employment destinations. Those now will be wholly regionally funded and decided and determined based on a region-wide planning process. Next slide. As we move from plan development now to plan education, we'll be continuing to use our website, but loading it full of more educational information. These decisions were approved in the summer, wrapped up into our federally required regional transportation plan and unanimously adopted on December 1st by MAG Regional Council. We do, as you know, are in a non-attainment area for air quality, and so we did have to wait for federal concurrence and did receive on the 16th of December notification from the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration and concurrence of a finding of air quality conformity. Next slide. So we're not quite done yet with our work, and that really now is our focus as we move from plan development really to the political side of the equation. Next slide. You'll see here on the bottom of this slide, our focus now is squarely with the 2022 legislative session, unique to Maricopa County, for a continuation of the proposition of a half-cent sales tax. We cannot go directly to our voters. We first have to go to the state legislature. In fact, very few folks probably recognize that we have over 24 different statutes guiding how we do business, what we can fund, what we can't fund. That's very unique to Maricopa County and our work. So we've spent really the last 4 months or so focused on pivoting now to what we call enabling legislation, to enable us to go out and ask our voters for a continuation, in this case, a 25-year continuation of the dedicated half-cent sales tax. We are currently focused wholly on that work. We expect the bill to drop any moment. Our sponsors will be dual introduction in both the House and Senate. Senator Pace, bill sponsor in the Senate, and Representative Carroll in the House. We'll continue to provide information and updates as Scott and the rest of your team will do as well. Certainly am able to answer any questions offline if you're interested. Next slide. So with that completes my presentation. I want to acknowledge here a picture of the Transportation Policy Committee, a few members here of the Valley Metro boards pictured here in. Really a lot of tough work to our elected officials and really your staffs who spent and committed hours and hours, evenings and weekends working alongside us over the course of the last year and will continue to as we work into session. A deep amount of appreciation on behalf of all of the staff of the Maricopa Association of Governments, as well as our partners, Valley Metro and ADOT, in partnering with your efforts to continue to sustain this important transportation investment now for another 25 years. Chairman Heredia, members of the Valley Metro boards, pleased to answer any questions that you have.
Perfect. Thank you. A lot of great information here. Folks have any questions or comments? Pat, if you can help me. Folks in the room there have questions.
Kevin Hartke.
Yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
Just a comment. I want to thank Audra. We've been obviously working as the Transportation Policy Committee for a long time in MAG, and good job of summarizing. And we still got a lot of heavy lifting that we're going to need mayors and councils to get our legislators and governors to get this to a vote for November. And there's still a lot of big decision points on this. So I know we are and will be continuing to reach out to cities to help us get this across the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Anyone else? And Pat, I can't see anybody in the board.
Chair, there don't appear to be any questions here in the room.
Perfect. We'll move forward. Thank you. All right.
Our sound just came on.
So here we go.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Next item. We have Chief Executive Officer Recruitment.
Sorry.
Update. Can you hear us? Pat?
Chair Heredia.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I thought we had our sound back, but we do not. We are on item number 6, and I believe that Greg Mosier is on the call.
Yes. Can you hear me, Pat? No?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, you can
I can
hear
hear
us. Okay.
you.
Okay. So
Sorry about that.
That's
Okay.
okay. So item number
We
6.
have Greg.
Mosier.
Yeah, Greg is on the line. So Greg, you want to provide us a quick update? He's with Krockheimer and Associates. He's with the search firm that we contracted to help us recruit the next CEO. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you very much. Pat, can you and everybody in the boardroom hear me okay? Okay, good. Just want to make sure because I know there's been sound trouble. Thank you very much. I just wanted to provide a brief update for everybody in attendance today. The search is going along well and as planned. We've had a number of meetings at the ad hoc recruitment committee in terms of determining process and approach for the recruitment. As many of you know, we've been advertising the position for the last, say, almost 60 days. The position closes this Friday afternoon, so that's the end of the deadline for submission of resumes. I am still receiving resumes, and I'm carefully reviewing those resumes to determine if those candidates meet minimum qualifications. I have been and will continue to spend time interviewing candidates who meet the qualifications to determine which ones are fit the goals and what you've set out in terms of asking me to look for in your next CEO. I am pleased to report that I think we have a strong and diverse slate of candidates to consider for the committee. We are going to be reviewing resumes, I believe, next week. We have a date set to review resumes. You will be receiving packages of resumes to review. And then the plan is to select the candidates we want to interview. We have dates set aside, and hopefully everybody has those on their calendar to interview those resumes. And we've got a process in place for the committee and members to interview candidates to make the selections. As asked of me, I just want to make sure everybody who's on the committee is aware. In addition to the resumes, I am providing you with an evaluation sheet that you can utilize at your discretion to help assess those candidates. The way I came up with the different criteria on that sheet was based on the job description we all put together. So I tried to pull areas and themes that I thought were important and that I saw highlighted in the job description, and that you could then look through the resumes, look through the cover letters of the candidate to determine your own evaluation of their feedback. I will be participating in the meeting next week to review resumes, so I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you may have as we're going through and evaluating and determining which candidates we move forward with for interviews. And with that, I'll stop and answer any questions you may have.
All right. Any questions for Greg and the CEO search? I know he mentioned the working diligently with the ad hoc committee that's running this process with Greg, and hopefully can move this further. So any questions or comments that people have? All right. Hearing none. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, item number 7, contract authority, monitoring and reporting. I'll pass it over to Scott Smith to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to introduce Jen Hilliard. As we know, we have been working on, based on the request from the board, a policy and procedures to give the board more up-to-date and timely reporting on our contract and the overall spending authority. And Jim has worked diligently with staff to come up with a policy that he will now review with you. Jim.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Yes, I'd like to provide a little bit of quick context for the policy that we have developed, and then describe how that policy would be implemented. Before I do, though, I'd like to thank the AFS and particularly Councilmember Pastor. They reviewed the draft policy at their November meeting. Councilmember Pastor provided some terrific comments. They've been incorporated in their entirety, and so we appreciated having that opportunity to get their feedback and to incorporate their thoughts. So as you recall, the genesis of this policy was in considering the adjustments to Valley Metro's lobbying contract authority. Mayor Gallego asked that we develop a process to ensure that changes in contract spending that will exhaust a contract's authority be communicated to the board in a reasonable time. So in many cases, that's a straightforward affair. Cities choose to increase bus service. That increases the number of revenue miles being paid through our bus contract, and we draft a memo and we bring it to you. Unfortunately, the world frequently isn't quite that simple, and as a result, the report that this policy establishes has to account for a couple different kinds of uncertainty, and I'd like to just sort of highlight those so that as you read the policy and the reporting process, you understand sort of why we've taken the approach that we've had. So the first type of uncertainty is just the normal dynamism of running an $800 million organization. So gas prices go up and they go down, and demand for ride choice goes up and it goes down. And in some years, more cars hit LRVs, and in some years less do. And so when you're dealing with contracts that are 5 or more years long, especially in the initial several years of the contract, it can be almost impossible to know whether those normal changes are going to net themselves out over time and you'll come in at or below your original estimate, or whether they won't. And so what you'll see in this policy is we classify those contracts where we think there's a possibility, but not a certainty, that the authority will be exhausted prior to the calendar end of the contract as at risk. And then we have reporting requirements for those. So we're trying to create transparency there in spite of the fact that we don't really know whether ultimately an adjustment in the authority will be needed or not. The second type of uncertainty that this report has to deal with are cases where an issue's occurred that we know is going to result in a need to change authority, but we don't yet know what new amount should be requested. And maybe the perfect example of that is COVID. We know that the pandemic impacted our cleaning costs, our printing costs, our advertising costs, IT costs, and many other contracts. But the amount of the adjustments to those contracts needed were really going to be driven by the length of the pandemic. And at least I, for one, have guessed that wrong every single time. And so there are times when an issue arises, we know it's going to have an impact, but we don't yet have enough information to know what new amount should be requested. And so you'll see in the policy, those contracts are classified as likely to exhaust their authority. And then in both cases, both where we know where a contract is at risk and a contract is likely, we'll be providing transparency to the board by including a new report in our standard quarterly reports that lists all of those contracts. Contracts that are likely to exceed their authority will be noted by the contract name. We'll note the issue that we believe is causing that to occur, when we became aware of that issue, what's being done to mitigate that impact, if there's something that can be done. And then lastly, when we would anticipate having enough information to bring it to the board in a memo to request the adjustment. Contracts that are likely to prematurely exhaust their authority will have all the same information, except of course the date that we'd be bringing it to the board, because we wouldn't yet know whether that was the case or not. And so by including this report, we'll both bring contracts to the board for adjustments as soon as we're aware of them and we have enough information to request a change. But we'll have the secondary mechanism to the quarterly report to ensure that the board has transparency in cases where we think there's a possibility, but we don't yet have enough information to bring it to the board for a full presentation and make a recommendation. And so with that brief recap, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from board members?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Item number 8, travel expenditures and solicitations. This item is presented for information only. If there's any questions, take them now. If no, no action is required. All right, perfect. Item number 9, report on current events, suggested future agenda items. Folks have any reports or agenda items for future meetings? Seeing none, all right. Next meeting is joint boards is scheduled for Thursday, February 17th at 11:15. All right. We'll move on to our Valley Metro RPTA agenda. We have first item for public comment. Imagine Mr. Crowley is there. Okay.
Yes. Yes, he is.
I can wait, talk after we go
No.
to exec.
Mr. Crowley, now is the time on the agenda for public comment. So if you could please make it over to this where you put it in before, right here. I will.
Could you say 1 minute? I can Not adequate. You want to turn that thing around and I can glance over at it? Thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. One of the things you just did on the procurement opportunities was, and documented here, it had community relations support services and planning support services and central call center. As I have tried to point out to you all in the past, your don't have 24-hour service on that. You don't even have it operating all the time that the buses and the rail are operating. Please, in this contract, we're only talking about what, $71 million? That be a part of it, that you're doing things for your ridership, that your customers, the ones that need it, are able to find these things out, especially since you are not going to have the bus book printed again. Now, with your item of the executive session. I didn't find out about that until the councilwoman said something. I can see now what it is because I did ask, would you please give that to me now and let me find out about it, which was about 3 minutes ago. And with what you're doing on that, it reminds me of when you did the Waymo thing, Chairwoman. If you'll recall, I had stopped into the offices and they said, well, we had posted it on the wall and the meeting was the next day. Nobody let me know, hey, we just posted that we're going to do a Waymo thing on the wall. So I understand, I get my documents in the mail, etc. But on this one, why I wasn't contacted, let me know, because according to them, it says the public is to know. You guys found out what, by an email and such, and that it's posted on the wall. Well, being that I am a participant in the public, give me a call, let me know it's on the agenda, or give me this when I come in. Thank you for your time. I gave you 30 seconds back. What you need to do is make this multimodal, as I pointed out at the joint meeting, with that rail, it's not. Why, when you're building stuff, don't you consider the humanity in the public? Lastly, is there any reason we don't have a standard for bus stops? The industry standard is every quarter mile. And what are you doing, Valley Metro, to make sure every one of them does have a covered stop? Because what? When it's 117 in the shade, you're killing people if you ain't got it.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. And just noting on the agenda, we do have the consent agenda. This is the only item for action, so if we can push this through and then we'll go into the next item, which is executive session.
Chair, and I'll take a roll call of the vote once there's a motion and a second.
Mayor Harkey, so move.
Bill Stipp, second.
Oh, it was seconded by Councilmember or Vice Mayor Pastor.
All right, Pat?
Okay, Vice Mayor Veronica Malone. Councilmember Clay Goodman.
Aye.
Mayor Kevin Hartke.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Monica Dorsey.
Yes.
Councilmember Mike Charnow. Mayor Bridget Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Lauren Tomachoff. She's a yes. Councilmember Bill Stipp.
Yes.
Supervisor Jack Sellers. He answered it yes. Councilmember Francisco Heredia.
Yes.
Councilmember John Edwards. He answered yes. Vice Mayor Laura Pastor. Yes. Councilmember Jeff Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Betty Janik.
Yes.
Councilmember Chris Judd. Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage.
Chris Judd said yes.
Thank you. And Mayor Rui Pereira.
Yeah.
And Mayor Michael LaVault.
Yes.
Motion passes, Chair.
All right, thank you, Pat. Item number 3, we have an executive session. Item is the board may vote to enter executive session pursuant to the revised statute, Arizona revised statute, for the purpose of discussion, consultation for legal advice concerning the authority, rights, obligations under the administrative code of the Regional Public Transportation Authority as adopted November 21st, 2013 of the board and chief executive officer, and hiring the chief financial officer. Request a motion and a second to enter an executive session.
Motion by Vice Mayor Pastor. Second by Councilmember Tomachoff.
Great.
I'll take a roll, Chair.
Go ahead.
Vice Mayor Veronica Malone. Councilmember Clay Goodman.
Present.
Mayor Kevin Hartke.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Monica Dorsey,
Yes.
Councilmember Mike Charnow, Mayor Bridget Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Lauren Tomachoff, Councilmember Bill Stipp,
Yes.
Supervisor Jack Sellers? Yes. Uh, Councilmember Francisco Heredia,
Yes.
Councilmember John Edwards? Vice Mayor Laura Pastor? Councilmember Jeff Brown?
No.
Councilmember Betty Janik?
Yes.
Councilmember Chris Judd?
Yes.
Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage? Mayor Rui Pereira?
Yes.
And Mayor Michael LaVault?
Yes.
Chair, the motion passes. I have sent a confidential link out to all of the board members. If you could please disconnect from this WebEx and connect to the WebEx that I sent out. We will join you shortly in another room and join that same WebEx.
Pat, real quick, do we know if the audio works in that room or?
Yes, we're on a separate phone line in there and a separate WebEx.
Okay, perfect.
If
All right.
we take just a couple minutes so everyone can have a quick break,
Sure.
we'll be in the other room by 12:35.
12:35. So 5 minutes. Use the other link that was sent out yesterday. So appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
video. Testing audio. Check sellers. Test check sellers. Testing John Edwards.
Testing Jack Sellers. Testing Laura Pastor. Testing Robin Arredondo Savage. Testing Lauren Tomachov. Testing John Edwards.
We just need to close this meeting, right? Or I think for folks on the call, we're just waiting for folks to come back, and then we'll close up our meeting here.
Chair Heredia, if you would like to conclude the RPTA meeting so that we can adjourn that meeting, and then we can start the VMR meeting.
Okay, I think just item number 4, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. If any have any agenda items or information here? All right, hearing none. Next meeting, it's scheduled for Thursday, February 17th at 11:15 a.m. So we might have some meetings. You'll get notice on that end if we have additional meetings there. Perfect.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great
Cool.
weekend.
Thank you. We'll start the VMR meeting in 1 minute. So Vice Mayor and Council Member, we do have laptops set up for you. If you could use the headsets, they'll be able to hear you for the VMR meeting. Let's see. Mayor Herkey, are you still with us?
Indeed.
Okay, I'm just checking so that I can take the. Okay, Chair Heredia, we're ready whenever you are.
Perfect. Convening the Valley Metro Rail meeting. First item, public comment. Pat, do we have anybody there or?
Yes, Blue Crowley is here.
Perfect. Mr. Crowley, you have 3 minutes.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I haven't even started talking. Well, I reset it, so
Go ahead, Blue.
just about. All right. I've got documents here, one for Valley Metro Rail, and it says sources of funding, operating revenue, source of funding, PTF. Those are the Prop 400 funds. This is an operating revenues. Why is it there since supposedly there are no PTF funds for operating the rail? With your procurement of the other thing, I'd like to point out again that we need to have the community relations support services and the call center operating all the time that the rail is operating. And since we are paying, what is it, just under $80 million for all these planning and support services over 3 to 5 years, please try to get it right. On the alignment for that extension to the west, why is rail so opposed to being multimodal? When I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different roads, crossings of light rail with the bus, why aren't there stops? If we're being multimodal, if you're working it, if you're trying to get rid of the air pollution, you make the system work together, and you don't put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stops that aren't there. I had to point out to you on the first segment that you did that you needed to have a stop at 44th and Priest. That didn't get put in later. I have continually said to you, while you're building this thing, make it so you can put stops in. But what do you do about that? And then the last thing I'd like to cover today is your right and wrong on the rail. The document that you have for the public has 6 different items. In your code of conduct, you have 37, and if you count the bullet points, it comes up to 41. And I keep on asking, so when you get the quarterly report, could you please break it down to let us know on the 41 different ones of what it is that you're upset with? My favorite one in here is that if you're chewing tobacco, it's a problem. And the one that I find to be the most abhorrent is it says, fighting, taunting, or aggressive disorderly behavior is prohibited. And it says, not being loud, abrasive, indecent, profane, or disruptive. Well, for me, if somebody's wearing a MAGA hat, that to me is being loud, abrasive, indecent, profane, and disruptive. And for my own self, I wear the Cardinals, the Diamondbacks, and the Suns. And if I see you wearing a New York Yankees cap, I will let you know you are a loser. And if you're wearing a Cowboys cap, the same.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Item number 2, we have the consent agenda here. The consent agenda is presented for action. Ask the committee if they have any questions or item pulled from the consent agenda. Hearing none, request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Perfect. Pat, can you take a quick roll call vote?
Mayor Harkey, City of Chandler.
Yes.
Councilmember Francisco Heredia, City of Mesa.
Yes.
Councilmember Laura Pastor, City of Phoenix. Vice Mayor, I said that not one all day. Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage. Okay,
Trying. Yes.
Perfect.
motion passes.
All right, next item, I-10 West Extension, amended locally preferred alternative and transit type. So I'll ask Mr. Scott Smith to present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Introducing Josh Matthews, who will give us the presentation.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Chair Heredia, members of the Board of Directors. As Scott said, my name is Joshua Matthews. I'm the project manager of the I-10 West Extension, and we'll be presenting today on the revised alignment and transit type recommendation. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. To get ourselves oriented, we are talking about the I-10 West Extension within the Regional Transportation Plan. Heads out along the I-10 out to 79th Avenue. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the I-10 West Extension, I think it's important to note because it is a very unique extension within our regional high-capacity transit system. I think we are all aware that the I-10 is very congested. Often in the evening, heading out west is quite a challenge to traverse. And so we really see the 10 West project as providing an alternative mode of transportation along this corridor. We see it as providing a shorter, more reliable travel time. Right now, we know that single occupancy vehicles, as well as our express buses, have unpredictable travel times ranging from upwards of over 40 minutes and sometimes even longer along this stretch of the highway. Next slide. In 2012, Phoenix City Council and the Valley Metro Board of Directors approved a locally preferred alternative, the alignment that you see today, for what was then known as the Capital I-10 West Extension Phase 1 and Phase 2. Since that time, the projects were renamed as the Capital Extension, which was brought to the board a few months back, and then the extension we're talking about today, the I-10 West Extension, or what used to be known as Phase 2. This project goes along Van Buren, west, north, up on the I-17 frontage road, traverses along west the I-10 in the center of the highway until approximately 47th Avenue. And then it heads up to the north side of I-10, heading out to 79th Avenue Park and Ride. Next slide. In April of 2019, Phoenix City Council asked us to revisit both projects, Capital Extension and I-10 West. Specifically, there was a request to re-engage with the public through an extended public hearing process, public meeting process, to look at extending the 10 West project out to Desert Sky Transit Center, to consider other transit modes for the 10 West project, to consider accelerating the project and how we can get it built sooner, look at funding, as well as to engage our West Valley partners to look at this from a regional approach. If you'll just give one click, please. Just wanted to note that today we're going to be talking about the first 3 bullets, and after today, the project team will begin working on the last 3 bullets. Next slide. I'm going to go over our public outreach and then talk about our technical analysis. This first section will just talk about the process, and then when we get into the next 2 sections, we'll talk about some of the results that we had from the technical analysis as well as from what we heard from the public. We went through a fairly robust engagement process that lasted over 2 years if you count our numerous stakeholder meetings that we continue to engage in. Started in the middle of 2019 where we engaged with the public through multiple meetings as well as virtual format. If you go to the next slide. And then one click. In January of 2020, right before COVID-19 started, we had 3 in-person public meetings within the community. These were well attended. We highlighted the history of the project, which is diverse, as everyone knows. We also highlighted the current status and what council directed us to look at. We talked about the potential extension to Desert Sky Transit Center, and we looked at how we could move the project forward a little quicker. Go to the next slide. Our second round of engagement came after COVID-19 began, and so we had really what was our first fully virtual engagement series that we've had on this project. We had about a month-long period where there was a website that residents could access, engage, watch videos, look through presentations, understand the information about the project, and as well as provide comments and feedback that the project team requested. For those that could not access the online portion, we also hosted 2 call-in sessions that were both in English and Spanish on a couple days during that period of time. And we received a robust amount of information. This was very well attended virtual format engagement series. Again, we talked about the history and the status. On this meeting, we discussed the transit type analysis that the team had performed, which I'll highlight here shortly. And again, revisited the extension to Desert Sky Transit Center. Go to the next slide, and then the next slide. So first, we're going to talk about that extension to Desert Sky Transit Center. As I mentioned, the original 2012 locally preferred alternative ended at the existing 79th Avenue Park and Ride, located on the southeast corner of McDowell and 79th Avenue. The request was to look at extending the alignment north, approximately a mile along 79th Avenue, going past Auction Pavilion, Desert Sky Mall, and then ending at the existing Desert Sky Transit Center. The technical team looked at this possible extension from a number of viewpoints and saw a lot of potential from a ridership perspective. Specifically, we saw almost 20% more ridership from our modeling. We also noted that the feedback we've received both from the community as well as within community documents such as the Maryville Village Core design plan noted the desire for the extension of light rail or high capacity transit along 79th Avenue. We also noted the connections to those activity centers and the significant amount of development that is being proposed along 79th Avenue. And lastly, that connection to Desert Sky Transit Center really connects into that local bus system, providing that multimodal approach, as well as the possibility of a future BRT line through Phoenix's BRT program. Next slide. The community input. So as I mentioned, we asked the community about this extension twice at both public meeting series. And as you can see, we had overwhelmingly positive response with on average 80% total of our almost 400 responses affirming that this was desired. Next slide. So based on that technical analysis as well, just back one slide. Thank you. Based on that technical analysis and that input that we received, we are recommending that the extension to Desert Sky Transit Center be brought into the LPA. And you can go to the next slide now. Next one. So the second point that we looked at and that we discussed with the public and from a technical perspective was the transit type. Back in 2012, this was originally envisioned as a light rail corridor. And so we revisited that to make sure that that analysis was sound, but also performed a comparative analysis, looking at another high capacity transit option, bus rapid transit. Go to the next slide, please. So our technical analysis looked at a number of criteria, and I won't highlight all of the results, but I just wanted to provide a couple high level ones from each one of our categories. So light rail, when compared to bus rapid transit, had a much higher ridership potential, approximately 50% more riders. However, BRT has a lower upfront capital cost to build, and from a constructability perspective, there are fewer challenges. One major benefit to light rail, though, is that it would be able to integrate into our regional light rail system and provide service to North Phoenix, the East Valley, and South Phoenix after South Central Extension opens. Light rail is also consistent with a number of local plans and policies that the City of Phoenix and the region has passed. Light rail also has a higher economic development potential because of its permanence and its visibility. And then lastly, that community input, which I'll note on the next slide, preferred light rail. Go to the next slide, please. So as I said, during that second engagement series, we asked the public about this comparative analysis and which transit type they would prefer. 3/4 of the 150 responses that we received preferred light rail, with another 8% noting that they had no preference as long as high capacity transit came out to the West Valley. So again, a very overwhelmingly positive response. Go to the next slide. So as such, the project team is recommending that the new locally preferred alternative revised alignment includes the Desert Sky Transit Center and that the transit type be light rail. Go to the next slide. I'll read the formal recommendation. So staff recommends that the Board of Directors approve the extension to Desert Sky Transit Center and reaffirm light rail as a transit type for the 10 West amended locally preferred alternative. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments from the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Appreciate it. Good information here. Any questions, comments from other board members? Can't see there, Pat, but folks are there.
There aren't any questions in the boardroom.
Okay. If no questions, request a motion and a second to approve the extension to Desert Sky Transit Center and a reaffirmed light rail as the transit type for the 10 West amended locally preferred alternative. That's a mouthful there.
I move.
That's a motion by Vice Mayor Pastor, second by Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Perfect. Pat, quick roll call.
Sure. Mayor Kevin Harkey,
Yes.
Councilmember Francisco Heredia,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Laura Pastor, and Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage. Motion passes.
All right, perfect. Item number 4, Valley Metro Rail fiscal year 2022 mid-year budget adjustment. Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Tyler Olson, Budget Director.
Good afternoon, Chairman Heredia, members of the Valley Metro Board. I'll be presenting our FY22 mid-year budget adjustment today. Each year we develop an annual operating and capital budget 9 months ahead of the fiscal year start. It's really based upon the available assumptions at that time. Based upon the updated information that we have today, we're requesting additional authority to spend to complete the necessary work. The vast majority of this adjustment request is really for capital construction activities and the timing of that work. Just an update of the timing, no change to the total project costs. Beginning with operations. Annual expenditures for light rail operations have increased based upon the recent commercial property and liability insurance renewal that was approved by the boards during the joint meeting in November. The overall premium increase is really a result of multiple factors, including the increased exposures associated with the expanding transportation network, as well as the light rail vehicle incidents and loss history, and the implications of continued hardening insurance market, as well as limited opportunities for transit risk coverage because of a declining number of the insurers out there willing to offer public transit coverage to public entities. Next slide. So here's a look at the sources of funds for operations. So member city contributions are up by 2%. I will note that we have identified year-to-date savings in operations as a result of operating at a reduced frequency. So that savings can help fund this. We'll continue to look for savings in other areas through the end of the year in order to keep each of your cities within their respective annual IGAs. Next slide. Uses of funds. With this adjustment, our operating budget increases by 1% in total. Moving on to our capital program, which again is the majority of the adjustment. Annual expenditures have increased for 3 capital projects. Really, again, due to the timing of the scheduled work, total project costs are really a multi-year budget that is approved by the FTA. And so no increase to the total costs. We're just accelerating, adjusting some of the timing of those assumptions. And for Tempe Streetcar, this is primarily due to realigning vehicle milestone payments for the new fleet to more accurately reflect the updated delivery schedule. The remainder of the increase is due to various project elements, including signals, drainage, safety, operational improvements that will be funded with capital improvement grant money from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARP. I do want to note that we have adjusted this number upward since the last time it was presented by $5.5 million. Again, that's really based upon additional updates that we have. So our construction contractor provided an updated schedule, as well as continued discussions with City of Tempe staff regarding some of those final remaining work items. Again, no additional funding is needed for the overall project. We're just updating the timing. As far as South Central, the increase is primarily for work that the construction contractor is currently completing, combined with increased utility work and archaeological support, additional support that's needed. For Northwest 2, upward adjustments is really a result of an updated cash flow from the contractor. Again, all costs are within the life of the project. Next slide. So sources of funds, really primarily funded with federal funding. So total increase to the operating side, $50.2 million. Again, $50.2 million as far as uses for the 3 projects I mentioned. So expanding our authority to spend based upon the updated timing of these projects, increasing the capital budget to 11%, by 11%. With that, Chairman Heredia, members of the board, the recommendation is before you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Tyler. Any questions or comments on this?
None in the boardroom, Chair.
Okay. Hearing none, I ask request a motion and a second to authorize the mid-year budget adjustment update to the Valley Metro Rail operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2022.
Vice Mayor Pastor is a motion. Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage is a second.
All right.
I'll
Pat-
take a quick roll.
Yep.
Mayor Kevin Harkey,
Yes.
Councilmember Francisco Heredia,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Laura Pastor, and Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage. Motion passes.
Perfect. Thank you. Item number 5, report on current events or future agenda items. Anyone have anything? Don't hear anything. Perfect. Next meeting, Thursday, February 17th, 2022. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.